Have you ever witnessed a moment when rules overshadowed respect, when bureaucracy trampled on honor? For one 83-year-old Vietnam War hero, what should have been his proudest moment, watching his grandson take the military oath, became an unforgivable display of disregard that shocked an entire room into silence. Welcome back to Story by Liam. Today, we dive into a powerful account that challenges our understanding of protocol versus respect. A story that asks, at what point does following procedure become an act of dishonor? The Riverside Military Academy stands as a monument to tradition and discipline. Its grand auditorium, with polished wooden panels and high ceilings, has hosted countless ceremonies where young cadets pledged their lives to service. On this particular day, hundreds gathered in anticipation. Family members sat with pride, military personnel stood at attention, and an atmosphere of solemn reverence filled the air. Among them was Arthur Reeves, an 83-year-old Vietnam veteran who had traveled across the country to witness his grandson Oliver's induction. After decades of service and sacrifice, Arthur's weathered face beamed with pride as he waited for the ceremony to begin. No one could have predicted how quickly this day of honor would transform into a moment that would force everyone present to question the very values they claimed to uphold. What happened in that room? First, the shocking ejection of a decorated veteran, then the 9 minutes of uncomfortable silence, and finally the moment when the entire room froze in collective realization, serves as a powerful reminder of what truly matters when honoring those who served. Have you ever seen someone disrespected simply because they didn't fit neatly into a rulebook? Have you witnessed a veteran being overlooked or dismissed? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because today's story might just change how you view the relationship between military protocol and human dignity. Arthur Reeves wasn't just any 83-year-old man. His life stood as a testament to duty, honor, and sacrifice. Enlisting at 19, Arthur served 3 tours in Vietnam, earning multiple commendations, including a Purple Heart, after sustaining injuries while rescuing 2 wounded comrades under heavy fire. His medals, though rarely displayed, told stories of courage that he himself seldom spoke about. After Vietnam, Arthur continued serving his country for another 2 decades, mentoring young recruits and embodying the values of military service. Those who served alongside him described a man of unwavering integrity who led by example rather than words. When he finally retired, Arthur didn't stop serving. He simply shifted his focus to his community, volunteering with veteran support groups and speaking at schools about the true meaning of sacrifice. But of all his accomplishments, none made Arthur prouder than seeing his grandson Oliver follow in his footsteps. Their bond transcended the typical grandfather-grandson relationship. From Oliver's earliest years, Arthur had been a constant presence, teaching him to fish, helping with homework, and sharing carefully selected stories from his military days that emphasized courage, teamwork, and doing what's right, even when it's difficult. When Oliver announced his decision to join the military, Arthur's eyes had welled with tears, not from sadness, but from profound pride. The weeks leading up to the ceremony had been filled with long phone calls where Arthur offered advice about military life, punctuated by reminiscences about his own experiences. For this special day, Arthur had risen before dawn, meticulously pressing his decades-old dress uniform. Though it hung somewhat looser on his frame now, he wore it with the same dignity as he had in his prime. He'd polished his medals until they gleamed and carefully packed a gift for Oliver, his own first set of dog tags, preserved all these years as a reminder of where his journey began. As Arthur made the 3-hour journey to Riverside Military Academy, his excitement was palpable. This ceremony represented more than just Oliver's induction. It was the continuation of a legacy, a bridge between generations of service and sacrifice. The Riverside Military Academy auditorium transformed into a fortress of formality as the ceremony hour approached. Military personnel moved with clockwork precision, each step measured, each gesture deliberate. The color guard stood at attention, flags perfectly aligned. Officers inspected every detail, from the spacing of chairs to the exact positioning of the podium where oaths would soon be sworn. Arthur arrived early, his weathered hands gripping a small album of family photos he'd brought to show Oliver afterward. He was escorted to a seat in the reserved section near the aisle, a courtesy offered to distinguished guests and those needing easier access. From this vantage point, he could clearly see where the cadets would stand for their oath-taking. As families filed in, filling the auditorium with hushed conversations, Arthur sat quietly observing the meticulous order around him. Every few minutes, his eyes would drift to the entrance, where Oliver would soon appear. When the cadets finally marched in, Arthur's posture straightened instinctively, muscle memory from decades of service taking over. He spotted Oliver immediately, standing tall on the third row, face composed but eyes betraying a hint of nervous excitement. The ceremony commenced with a commander's address emphasizing the gravity of military commitment. "Today," the officer announced, "these young men and women join a tradition of service that demands nothing less than their absolute dedication." Arthur nodded in solemn agreement, his gaze never leaving his grandson. Meanwhile, security personnel stationed throughout the auditorium began methodical sweeps of the room. Their earpieces buzzed with periodic updates, and their attention seemed increasingly focused on maintaining strict adherence to protocol. Two guards exchanged glances before one consulted a clipboard, then whispered something to his colleague while gesturing subtly toward the reserved seating area. Arthur, oblivious to the increasing scrutiny, leaned forward slightly as Oliver's row was called to prepare. His hand moved unconsciously to his heart, a gesture of respect and overwhelming emotion as the moment drew near. As the ceremony progressed toward the oath-taking, a security guard approached his supervisor, pointing discreetly toward Arthur's seat. The supervisor consulted a printed protocol guide, frowning slightly before nodding with apparent reluctance. Three guards then moved with determined steps toward Arthur's seat. "Sir, I need to speak with you," the lead guard said, bending down to address Arthur in a hushed but firm tone. "You're seated in a restricted area." Arthur looked up, confusion crossing his weathered face. "I was escorted here when I arrived. This is where they told me to sit." The guard's expression remained unmoved. "Our briefing indicates this section is reserved for immediate family only. Additionally, we've observed you attempting to make contact with the cadets." Arthur's bewilderment deepened. I was just watching my grandson." "Sir, please come with us without disruption," the guard insisted, this time loud enough for nearby attendees to hear. "The ceremony has strict protocols we must enforce." When Arthur hesitated, two guards stepped forward, each taking one of his arms firmly but not roughly. The elderly veteran's face transformed from confusion to hurt as the reality of the situation dawned on him. His eyes, which had moments before shone with pride, now reflected disbelief and embarrassment. "I fought for this country," Arthur said quietly, his voice barely audible as he was helped to his feet. "I just wanted to see my grandson take his oath." From the formation of cadets, Oliver watched in horror as his grandfather was escorted toward the exit. His disciplined stance faltered for just a moment, his eyes widening in shock. A superior officer noticed and shot him a warning glance, forcing Oliver to regain his composure, though his jaw clenched visibly with suppressed emotion. As Arthur was led down the aisle, a ripple of uncomfortable murmurs spread through the audience. Parents exchanged glances of concern. A few veterans in attendance shifted uneasily in their seats. One older woman half rose as if to protest, only to be gently pulled back down by her companion. The guards escorted Arthur through the doors, and for a moment, the ceremony seemed to pause, a collective intake of breath before the officiating officer cleared his throat and continued, as if nothing had happened. In the wake of Arthur's removal, the atmosphere in the room changed. What had been reverent became tense. The carefully orchestrated proceedings continued, but beneath the surface, a current of unease flowed through the audience. Would you have spoken up if you witnessed an elderly veteran being removed from such an important family moment? What would you have done in Oliver's position, torn between military discipline and family loyalty? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because what happened next challenged everyone's understanding of honor. For 9 excruciating minutes, the ceremony marched forward with mechanical precision. The officiating officer continued his speech about duty and honor, yet the words now seemed to ring hollow against the backdrop of what had just occurred. Cadets maintained their formation, their faces masks of discipline despite the disruption. In the third row, Oliver stood rigid, his eyes fixed forward but seeing nothing. His grandfather, the very reason he'd chosen this path, had been escorted out like an unwelcome intruder. Each second stretched painfully as he struggled to reconcile military obedience with the injustice he'd just witnessed. Throughout the audience, discomfort spread like a silent wave. Parents shifted in their seats, exchanging glances loaded with unspoken questions. Where had they taken the elderly veteran? Would he be allowed back in? How could this happen at a ceremony meant to honor service and sacrifice? A military chaplain scheduled to speak next reviewed his notes with a furrowed brow, occasionally glancing toward the doors through which Arthur had disappeared. Two senior officers near the stage whispered urgently to each other, their expressions grave. The atmosphere grew increasingly stifling. What should have been a proud moment transformed into an exercise in collective restraint. Several attendees checked their watches, marking the uncomfortable passage of time since the ejection. Outside in the hallway, muffled voices could be heard, too distant to distinguish words, but the tone suggested heated discussion. Each time the door cracked open slightly, all eyes instinctively darted in that direction, anticipation building with every passing minute. The ceremonial clock on the wall ticked relentlessly forward. 8 minutes. 8 minutes and 30 seconds. 9 minutes. No one could have predicted what would happen next. A moment that would transform this day from a tale of bureaucratic cruelty into something altogether different. At precisely 9 minutes after Arthur's removal, the auditorium doors swung open with deliberate force. Major Victor Lawson, a commanding figure known equally for his strict adherence to military standards and his unwavering sense of justice, strode purposefully down the center aisle. His uniform was impeccable, his posture rigid, but his expression carried something rarely seen during formal proceedings: raw, controlled emotion. The room fell silent instantly. The speaker at the podium stopped mid-sentence. Even the subtle shuffling of feet and clearing of throats ceased completely, as if someone had suddenly removed all sound from the world. Major Lawson reached the front of the auditorium and turned to face the assembly. His gaze swept slowly across the room, over the cadets standing at attention, across the rows of increasingly uncomfortable officers, and finally to the families watching with bated breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating with quiet authority, "I must interrupt these proceedings to address a grave error in judgment that occurred moments ago." His words hung in the air, clear and unavoidable. "Today we gather to celebrate commitment to service. We recite oaths about honor, duty, and respect." He paused, allowing the weight of each word to settle. "Yet not 9 minutes ago, we failed to embody those very principles." Major Lawson gestured toward the door. "The man who was removed from our ceremony is Arthur Reeves. He served 3 tours in Vietnam. He carries 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. For 43 years, he has represented everything we claim to value." A murmur began to rise, but Lawson raised his hand, and silence immediately returned. Arthur Reeves was not simply another guest. He is the reason his grandson stands before us today. He is the living embodiment of the oath these young men and women are about to take. His voice grew more intense, though he never shouted. And we escorted him out because he sat in the wrong seat and dared to show emotion while watching his grandson. The collective realization that swept through the room was almost physical. A wave of understanding that crashed over every person present. Several officers looked down at their hands. A cadet in the front row blinked rapidly against forming tears. "I have spent my career believing that military protocol exists to uphold our highest values, not to deny them," Lawson continued. "If our rules cannot accommodate the honor due to an 83-year-old hero who simply wanted to witness his legacy continue, then we must question not the veteran, but our rules." The major turned to the commanding officer. "Sir, with your permission, I propose we pause this ceremony. Before these cadets swear to uphold our values, let us demonstrate what those values truly mean." For several heartbeats, the entire room seemed suspended in time. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the gentle whirring of the air conditioning system and the distant, muffled conversation beyond the doors. In that frozen moment, Something profound shifted in the collective consciousness of everyone present. A recognition that sometimes honoring tradition means knowing when to break from it. The commanding officer rose slowly from his seat, approached the microphone, and cleared his throat. "Major Lawson is right," he announced, his voice carrying a weight of conviction that surprised even those who knew him well. "Bring Mr. Reeves back immediately." As two officers hurried toward the exit, the commanding officer addressed the assembly. "Today's ceremony will continue, but with a necessary correction. We will honor not just the future of our military, but its living history." When Arthur re-entered the auditorium, the transformation was immediate and profound. The entire assembly, cadets, officers, and families alike, rose in unison. The spontaneous standing ovation thundered through the hall as Arthur, still visibly shaken but standing tall, was escorted not to his previous seat, but to a place of honor at the front row. "Mr. Reeves," the commanding officer said, gesturing to the seat, "this is where heroes belong." As Arthur settled into his new position, an unexpected voice called out from among the attendees. "Permission to speak, sir." An older gentleman in a Vietnam veteran's cap stood from his seat in the middle of the auditorium. "Granted," the commanding officer replied, breaking yet another protocol. "My name is James Harrington, 3rd Infantry Division." The man's voice wavered slightly. "I served with Arthur Reeves in '68. When our unit was ambushed near Kassan, Arthur carried 3 wounded men to safety under heavy fire." He turned toward Arthur. "I was one of those men. Everything I've done since, my family, my life, exists because of him." This opened a floodgate. One by one, veterans in the audience stood to offer their own tributes. Some had served with Arthur directly. Others simply recognized the sacrifice he represented. Each testimony painted a more complete picture of the man who had been so callously removed minutes earlier. In the cadet formation, Oliver's posture had changed subtly but significantly. The shock and hurt in his eyes had transformed into something more powerful, a newfound understanding of what his oath truly meant. It wasn't about blind adherence to rules. It was about the courage to stand for what's right, even when doing so requires breaking from convention. When Oliver finally stepped forward to take his oath, he directed his words not just to the officiating officer, but with deliberate intent toward his grandfather. Each phrase carried new meaning, a personal commitment to honor not just the institution he was joining, but the individuals who had sacrificed to make it worthy of service. Have you ever witnessed a moment when compassion needed to override procedure? When was a time you saw someone choose the spirit of a rule rather than its letter? Share your experiences below, because these moments of moral courage remind us what truly matters in our communities and institutions. The events at Riverside Military Academy that day reverberated far beyond those auditorium walls. Within a week, the Academy's leadership convened an emergency review of ceremony protocols. The resulting policy document, now known informally as the Reeves Directive, established new guidelines for accommodating veterans at military functions. "Military ceremonies exist to honor service and sacrifice," read the opening statement. "All protocols must be implemented with this primary purpose in mind." The directive specifically mandated that veterans be given priority seating, that staff receive specialized training in recognizing service insignia and medals, and that a designated veteran liaison be present at all formal events to prevent similar incidents. The impact spread to other military institutions. 3 major service academies revised their guest policies after reviewing what happened at Riverside. Training programs for military police and security personnel added modules on respectful interaction with elderly veterans. What began as an isolated incident became a catalyst for meaningful reform. For Arthur, the experience left complex emotions in its wake. In a brief interview with his local newspaper, he reflected on the day with characteristic humility. "At first, I felt shame," he admitted. "Being removed like that brought back difficult memories of how some of us were treated after Vietnam." His eyes brightened as he continued. "But what happened afterward, that's what I'll remember. Not just being invited back, but hearing those stories from men I served with, seeing the impact our generation had. It reminded me why we served in the first place." Oliver's military career began on very different footing than he had anticipated. The oath he eventually took that day carried deeper significance, after witnessing both the failure and redemption of the institution he was joining. "My grandfather taught me about service through his actions," Oliver later shared during his first leadership training. "But that day taught me something equally important, that systems are imperfect, and sometimes honor requires the courage to challenge them from within." In military communities across the country, the incident sparked vital conversations about the gap between military values and practices. Veterans groups hosted forums discussing how tradition sometimes calcifies into rigid procedure at the expense of the very principles it was designed to uphold. At officer training schools, the case became a teaching tool for ethical leadership. Cadets were presented with the scenario and asked to consider how they would have responded. "Leadership isn't about enforcing rules," one instructor noted. "It's about understanding when rules contradict the values they were created to protect." Perhaps most significantly, the incident inspired a grassroots movement within military ranks. "Honor before protocol" became an unofficial motto among service members, committed to ensuring that regulations would never again supersede respect for those who had served. What began as a moment of institutional failure transformed into a powerful opportunity for growth, reflection, and recommitment to the core values of military service. The story of Arthur Reeves and that transformative day at Riverside Military Academy offers us more than just an account of an institution's failure and redemption. It illuminates a fundamental truth that extends far beyond military contexts. When rules and humanity collide, our response defines who we truly are. In our modern world of checklists, protocols, and procedures, we risk losing sight of the human element. Institutions, whether military, governmental, corporate, or educational, exist to serve people, not the other way around. When we elevate procedural compliance above human dignity, we betray the very values these systems were created to protect. Veterans like Arthur Reeves represent living history, walking embodiments of sacrifice and courage. Their treatment reflects not just our respect for military service, but our capacity to recognize the human foundation upon which all our institutions rest. When we fail to honor these individuals properly, we diminish not only them, but ourselves and the principles we claim to uphold. Yet this story also reminds us of our capacity for correction and growth. Major Lawson's intervention demonstrates that moral courage often means standing up against established procedures when they contradict deeper values. True leadership isn't blindly enforcing rules, it's understanding when those rules need to be reconsidered in light of higher principles. Each of us faces similar choices daily. We encounter situations where following protocol would be easier than recognizing the human exception before us. In these moments, we must ask ourselves, what values truly matter most? What would honoring those values require of me in this moment? Arthur and Oliver's story challenges us to examine the systems we participate in and to ensure they serve their intended purpose, uplifting human dignity rather than diminishing it. Their experience reminds us that real respect isn't found in rigid adherence to procedure, but in recognizing when procedure must bend to accommodate something more important. Have you witnessed moments when humanity should have trumped procedure? Have you seen veterans or others treated with disrespect simply because they didn't fit neatly into a system's expectations? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this account moved you, subscribe to hear more powerful stories that challenge us to examine how we honor those who have sacrificed for us all.